Today's major news from Korea. This fall, the 2nd Stryker Brigade, also known as the Lancer Brigade, will be deployed to the U.S. Army's 2nd Infantry Division in Korea. The U.S. Department of the Army announced that the Lancer Brigade stationed at Joint Base Lewis McChord, Washington, will replace the 1st Armored Brigade under the 1st Armored Division, which was a rotational unit of the USFK. The U.S. Army said this was part of a regular troop deployment to support U.S. commitments to South Korea. Earlier in July, the Ministry of the Army officially announced that it had decided to convert the Army units stationed in Korea from the existing Armored Brigade Combat Team to the Stryker Brigade Combat Team, which uses the M1126 Stryker wheeled armored vehicle as its main weapon. The Stryker armored vehicle has a maximum speed of about 100 km per hour and a range of 500 km, and is evaluated for its speed, survivability, and firepower. According to the U.S. Army's policy to change the organization of USFK, the Lancer Brigade is expected to be deployed to Korea around November. It is known that the U.S. Army is planning to continue deploying and operating existing armored brigade equipment, such as the M1 Abrams tank and M2 Bradley armored car, to the USFK separately from the rotational deployment of the Stryker Brigade. China continues to control the metropolis despite experiencing economic growth shocks due to the Shanghai blockade. The Chengdu Motor Show in Sichuan Province, which is called China's 4th largest motor show, was suspended during the event. According to the Chinese newspaper network, the 2022 Chengdu Motor Show was originally scheduled to be held from the 26th of last month to the 4th of this month, but was abruptly cancelled on the 30th of last month. The organizers announced that the motor show will be temporarily suspended in accordance with the corona quarantine policy and will be notified later on when it will resume. The Chengdu Motor Show has been receiving great attention from the automobile industry as it is the first large-scale motor show held in China since the Beijing Motor Show, originally scheduled for April, was postponed. At this auto show, 128 car brands exhibited over 1,600 finished cars. In order to prevent the spread of COVID-19, the quarantine authorities in Chengdu, Sichuan Province, China, have banned all residents from going out for 1 to 4 days and are conducting full inspections for infection. Chengdu is the capital of Sichuan Province, a major western city, and is a major city accounting for about 1.7% of China's GDP. As of the first half of this year, Shanghai accounts for 3.4% of China's GDP. Although Chengdu's population and economic size are not larger than those of Shanghai, it means that the impact on China is not small. If the number of COVID-19 infections continues in Chengdu, there is concern that the tourism industry will be hit during the Mid-Autumn Festival holiday this month. Shenzhen City, which is called China's Silicon Valley and is crowded with IT companies, has entered the lockdown process again following March. Currently, 6 central districts out of 9 districts are being managed in a lockdown system for 2 days on the 3rd and 4th. China is sticking to its zero-corona policy despite experiencing an economic shock from the lockdown in Shanghai. In addition, Dalian, Liaoning Province, has blocked the downtown area since the 30th of last month, and Shijiazhuang, the capital of Hebei Province, and Shenyang, the capital of Liaoning Province, which are adjacent to Beijing, also suspended public transportation from the 28th and 29th of last month, respectively. If the US starts to regulate the export of AI semiconductors in earnest, it is predicted that the topography of the global IT market as well as China will change. Although it is still a somewhat distant scenario, there is also a forecast that if the situation worsens, the aftermath will also affect Samsung Electronics and TSMC in Taiwan. After the news that the US government plans to suspend shipments of NVIDIA and AMD's AI semiconductors to China, analyses are pouring in from various angles to predict the aftermath that will be devastating if this measure is realized. The US put forward a card to suspend exports of AI semiconductors under the pretext that it could be used militarily at a time when the military conflict over the Taiwan Strait is greatly escalating. In fact, the idea that the US had to control high-performance semiconductors, which is the basic raw material for innovative technologies, in order to check China, which is emerging as a competitor for technological supremacy, has been raised for a long time. Analysis that has been put into action. It remains to be seen whether the US strategy to tame China through high-performance semiconductors will succeed, or if only US semiconductor companies and IT companies will suffer sales losses in their Chinese business. In the midst of this, investment finance companies and market analysts on Wall Street almost unanimously point to China's big tech companies as the places that will be hit the hardest by the AI semiconductor export restrictions. It was predicted that the cessation of export of AI semiconductors will inevitably disrupt the development of various software to implement the AI platform of Chinese big tech companies. In the future, it means that Chinese companies will suffer from a severe famine for high-performance semiconductors produced by American companies. If you broaden your horizons, the biggest blow is the Chinese government, which has put a brake on the development of the AI industry. In order for big tech companies in China to complete an AI platform, they need to learn a lot of image data and respond to natural language processing. In order to realize the so-called supergiant AI, such high-performance AI semiconductors are a key resource. Aside from developing high-performance military weapons, China sends rockets to the moon, makes various robots, and autonomous vehicle issues are ultimately affected by high-performance AI chips. It is also fatal for Chinese companies that are competing fiercely for the global cloud market. What is clear is that Chinese big tech companies have to make a choice on the premise that there is no chip on the planet that can completely replace the high-performance AI semiconductors of NVIDIA and AMD in the current situation. Experts predict that Samsung Electronics and Taiwan's TSMC could be the biggest victims, assuming that Chinese big tech companies have found a way to normally develop a giant AI platform without relying on high-performance semiconductors from NVIDIA and AMD. In other words, depending on the development of the situation, it is predicted that not only will the export of AI semiconductor chip graphics cards be stopped to China, but also a wide range of semiconductor isolation operations will be launched in China, including memory semiconductors. The prospects for the future are not simple in that this measure is not just a high-performance AI semiconductor but is another start of a technology war between the US and China. The US has approved a $1.1 billion arms sale to Taiwan. It is interpreted that the U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi came to support Taiwan after fears of an armed clash between China and Taiwan grew. The U.S. Department of Defense's Defense Security Cooperation Agency said the U.S. State Department has approved a plan to export $1.1 billion worth of weapons to Taiwan. The list includes 60 AGM-84L Harpoon Block II surface-to-ship missiles valued at $355 million and 100 AIM-9X Block II Sidewinder air-to-air missiles valued at $85.6 million. The contract extension of the contract for logistics support for surveillance radar equipment worth $655.4 million was also approved. Laura Rosenberger, Senior Director of China Affairs at the White House National Security Council, said, "The People's Liberation Army is putting pressure on Taiwan by strengthening air and naval deployments around Taiwan and trying to change the Taiwan Strait situation." He said that he would provide necessary supplies. She expressed her support for Taiwan at a time when a sense of military crisis between China and Taiwan was growing. However, the U.S. Department of Defense added that the provision of equipment would not change the military balance in the Taiwan Strait. In response to the U.S. approval of arms sales to Taiwan, the Chinese embassy in the U.S. issued a statement saying that it would give a false signal to the separatists of Taiwan independence and seriously endanger the peace and stability of the Taiwan Strait as well as Sino-US relations. Emphasized. Minister of Foreign Affairs Park Jin said that as a result of sincere dialogue and communication with the Japanese side, a channel for improvement of Korea-Japan relations is being prepared. Minister Park met with Japanese Foreign Minister Yoshimasa Hayashi 4 times in a video congratulatory speech at the 10th Korea-Japan Future Dialogue Forum hosted by the East Asian Research Institute and Japan's Kenan NPO on the same day, and continued serious discussions. He emphasized that by strengthening communication and restoring mutual trust, a prompt solution to the pending issues will be prepared. Accordingly, interest is drawn whether the two countries will find a way to resolve the conflict between the two countries related to the South Korean Supreme Court's ruling on compensation for forced labor. Minister Park also mentioned a joint report from the two organizations that the mutual favorability of the people of the two countries has recovered to the level before the boycott of Japanese products in 2019. After introducing President Yoon Suk-yeol's Liberation Day congratulatory speech, "Korea must join forces with Japan in the face of challenges that threaten the freedom of the world's citizens," he said. Opportunities for strategic cooperation between the two countries due to the neglected relationship between the two countries should not be missed, he said. In the same video congratulatory speech, Foreign Minister Hayashi said, "Korea is an important neighbor, and given the current strategic environment, there has never been a time when progress in Korea-Japan and Korea-US-Japan cooperation was as important as it is now." Foreign Minister Hayashi said, "We will continue to communicate closely with the South Korean side based on Japan's consistent position in order to bring the Korea-Japan relationship back to a healthy one." National Assembly Speaker Kim Jong-un is scheduled to hold bilateral talks with Zhansu, chairman of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress of China, at the National Assembly on the 16th. At a time when the confrontation between the US and China is getting sharper, it is noteworthy whether parliamentary diplomacy will open the door to improving relations between Korea and China. Chairman Kim and Chairman of the Standing Committee of China Zhansu are scheduled to hold talks on various pending issues, such as measures to strengthen cooperation between the two countries' parliaments, in the 30th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic ties between Korea and China in the meeting room of the National Assembly this afternoon. After the meeting, a joint press release is also planned in the open hall next to the reception room of the National Assembly. For this summit, which is being held at the official invitation of Chairman Kim Jong-un, Chairman Lee will lead a Chinese delegation to Korea from the 15th to the 17th. The 66-member delegation includes 4 ministers and 3 deputy ministers: Yang Jeon-Woo, Secretary of the Standing Committee; Liang, Chief Member of the Inspection and Judicial Committee; Saos, Chief Member of the Finance and Economy Committee; and Zhang Yesui, Chief Member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Meanwhile, the Chairman of the Standing Committee of China is the Speaker of the National Assembly of the Republic of Korea, and is the third most important figure in the Chinese Communist Party after President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Keqiang. He is also a member of the 7 Standing Committee of the Politburo, the highest decision-making body of the Communist Party of China. It is the first visit by the Chinese side of the Standing Committee to South Korea in 7 years since Zhang Dejiang, the former chairman of the Standing Committee in 2015. People's Strength lawmaker Kim Ki-hyein, related to Democratic Party leader Lee Jae-myung, after receiving a summons to the prosecution, said, "It's not appropriate to grab a pod with the wrong thing because you can't shake it like a duster. It's the CEO's excuse," he criticized and called for a strict prosecution investigation. Rep. Kim, who is being considered as the leader of the People's Power Party, posted on his SNS this morning and said, "It's an excuse for Lee Jae-myung, the Democratic Party leader, who has a history of 4 crimes including impersonation of a public official, accusation and obstruction of the execution of special duties. They make embarrassing and vague excuses like that in the course of investigations and trials." He continued, "If you are in a position to be investigated for spreading false information, it is not in line with common sense to give a polite explanation while presenting convincing evidence. I asked if I would." Rep. Kim also said, "It's really frightening to see in real life the scene of a criminal suspect threatening and admonishing a prosecutor who catches a thief, a scene we saw in the movie Azura. And threatening oppression is a scene that only comes out of a gangster movie. At the same time, dog-daughter cannot win public sentiment. No bulletproof vest can block the power of the truth." He demanded that he not be sarcastic and negligent in his duties, but rather pursue fair law enforcement through a strict investigation. Rep. Kim said on his SNS the day before, "It's not enough to list 4 criminals as candidates for the presidential election, and the Democratic Party, which elected Kodobi, which continues to be accused of corruption, as the leader of the first opposition party, before it's too late." Party leader Lee Jae-myung, "It makes sense to stick with the bongos," he said. Bongopajik is an old saying that means to dismiss an official who has committed an unlawful act and seal and lock the government office. Rep. Kim also said, "Pandora's box to reveal the truth is slowly opening. It is still the tip of the iceberg. Lee Jae-myung's enemy is Lee Jae-myung himself. It has been confirmed that key officials of the Songbol Group, which are under investigation by the prosecution, have recently visited Thailand, where the group's actual owner, former Chairman Kim, is staying. It is understood that Songbol Group executives and representatives of affiliates met with former Chairman Kim in Thailand from the end of July to the beginning of August this year. Former Chairman Kim left for Singapore on May 31 this year, right after he obtained confidential information from the prosecution on the Songbol Group, and is currently staying in Thailand. The Suwon District Prosecutor's Office's Integrated Investigation Team, which is investigating the alleged embezzlement and breach of trust by Lee Jae-myung of the Democratic Party of Korea, has also caught on to this circumstance, and it is known that they have recently summoned officials of the Songbang Group to investigate. An official from the Songbol Group said, "It is true that some of the group's executives met Kim in Thailand. However," he explained, "at that time, my departure from Thailand was a business trip related to a local project of Songbang Buell's affiliate." Prosecutors are expanding the investigation, reporting that the possibility of systematic destruction of evidence is high and that the PCs and mobile phones of key executives within the group have been replaced since May 24 this year, when the secrets of the investigation into Songbangol were leaked, and former Chairman Kim left the country. Prosecutors believe that former Chairman Kim still exerts a powerful influence on the overall management of the Songbol Group. After receiving an arrest warrant for Kim last month, the prosecution made a red request through Interpol. He has also requested the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to invalidate Kim's passport. On the 4th, Gwangju Metropolitan City Mayor Kang Ki-young responded to the urging of the Democratic Party of Korea, People's Power, Kwon Song-dong, to reveal the correct position on the construction of the Gwangju shopping mall on the 4th. He said, "I would be grateful if you came up with a support measure." Previously, Won-nae Kwon, CEO of Won-nae Kwon, posted on Facebook, "This year, several companies have announced their intention to build a shopping mall in Gwangju. However, the project that was expected to proceed smoothly is in danger of being stranded again," he pointed out. Currently, the Democratic Party controls the head of the Gwangju local government and the city and district councils. "We need to clarify our exact position on the complex shopping mall." He said, "Will we allow companies to enter freely or will we again work with civic groups to trample the aspirations of Gwangju citizens? If civic groups in Gwangju and the Democratic Party interfere with the attraction of the shopping mall, we will meet directly with companies that have expressed their intention to invest and listen to their concerns." In response, Mayor Kang countered through Facebook on the same day, saying, "The construction of the Gwangju shopping complex is in the process of cruising." Mayor Kang said, "I am very nervous about the Typhoon Hinamno, and I am trying to respond, but today CEO Kwon Song-dong suddenly announced that the shopping mall is stranded." He explained, "Our city is also making various preparations such as transparent and prompt licensing," he said, pointing out that the remarks of floor leader Kwon are pouring cold water on the hard-working business. He added, "I would be grateful if the government and the ruling party came up with a support plan for how to support the Gwangju shopping mall, which is a promise as well as a promise for the local elections. All you have to do is come up with a plan on how to do support." USFK THAAD was introduced to Korea in April 2017 to prepare for a North Korean ballistic missile attack. Regarding the deployment of THAAD on June 9, 2017, during the previous administration, then National Security Office Director Chung Eui-yong said, it was announced that THAAD was decided to protect South Korea and U.S. forces in Korea from the increasing threat from North Korea. At that time, President Moon Jae-in also said in an interview with the Washington Post at the Blue House on June 20, 2017, the decision to deploy THAAD was made through an agreement between the ROK and the U.S. based on the ROK-US alliance for the safety of our ROK and U.S. forces in Korea. However, the left-leaning Moon Jae-in administration has been criticized for delaying environmental impact assessments during his tenure and neglecting protests against the deployment of THAAD as a policy to look out for China and hope for North Korea. Although the final decision was made on the deployment of THAAD after securing legality by the last government, even 5 years later, protests continue whenever various goods and construction materials are brought into the THAAD base. U.S. Senate Majority Leader Dick Durbin, who visited South Korea in May 2017, said about the cost of operating the THAAD deployment, which was fully borne by the U.S., we could spend $923 million elsewhere. If I live in South Korea, North Korea it is likely that they want as many missile defense systems as possible to protect the lives of the people from hundreds of missiles that will be launched at South Korea. Koreans said they could not understand why such sentiments did not dominate the discussion. Although the primary goal of THAAD is to protect USFK bases from Chinese and North Korean missiles, it is interpreted that USFK and its equipment and facilities are ultimately to protect the lives and property of the Korean people. Until now, the U.S. military has been airlifting key materials, such as oil, required for the operation of the THAAD radar into the base using helicopters rather than vehicles. The government and military authorities have increased the number of supplies in the THAAD base using vehicles from 3 times a week to 5 times since the Yoon Suk-yeol administration took office in May. Currently, it is known that measures are being taken to ensure always-on ground access. In the midst of this, the government and military authorities, considering the opposition from residents and groups opposing THAAD, will discuss with local police rather than regular ground access to promote a plan to go through preliminary coordination so that the U.S. can access the base at the time desired by the U.S. side for the time being. Passed on. The government authorities also plan to communicate with the local residents near the THAAD base while promptly promoting the construction of a highway between Songju and Daegu and the establishment of a comprehensive welfare town. It was found that most of the terms liberal democracy and free democratic basic order disappeared from the social studies textbooks for 5th and 6th grade elementary school, which were replaced with certified textbooks from next year. Also, all textbooks expressed August 15, 1948 as establishing the government of the Republic of Korea, and only a few textbooks wrote that the Republic of Korea was approved by the United Nations as the only legal government on the Korean peninsula. On the 31st of last month, the Korea Curriculum and Evaluation Institute released the results of passing the social studies textbook test for 5th and 6th grades of elementary school to be used by elementary school students from next year. The Moon Jae-in government decided to convert the textbooks for grades 3 to 6 of elementary school, which had been issued by the state government, to be certified, and publishers have developed certified textbooks according to the curriculum guidelines made by the existing Moon Jae-in government. From this year, the social test textbooks for grades 3 and 4 have already been used, and the first grade textbooks for grades 5 and 6 to be used next year have passed the screening this time. Recently, the Ministry of Education released a draft of an elementary social studies curriculum that omits a part such as describe the cause and process of the Korean War. In elementary school, there is no separate Korean history subject, but it is learned as a part of social studies subjects. As a result of examining the textbooks that passed the examination, only 2 of the 11 types mentioned liberal democracy or liberal democratic basic order. When the Moon Jae-in government changed elementary social studies textbooks in 2018, instead of replacing liberal democracy in the existing textbooks with democracy, a section called Free and Democratic Basic Order in the Constitution was inserted. However, in this certified textbook, even the expression Free and Democratic Basic Order was mentioned in only 2 out of 11 types. The other 9 types only wrote democracy. On August 15, 1948, when the National Day controversy arose, all 11 textbooks expressed it as establishing the government of the Republic of Korea. The Moon Jae-in government changed the expression establishing the Republic of Korea to establishing the government of the Republic of Korea in the existing textbooks, and this time, the certified textbooks also used that expression. Most of the certified textbooks did not state the fact that in December 1948, the United Nations recognized the government of the Republic of Korea as the only legitimate government on the Korean peninsula. Of the 11 types, only 2 types of textbooks for genius and history of education used this fact. The other 7 types did not mention this fact itself, and emergency textbooks and emergency education were approved as recognized as the only legitimate government established in the Korean peninsula where elections are possible and the only legitimate government established in an area where the United Nations general election monitoring is possible. He said. The Moon Jae-in government was criticized for undermining the legitimacy of the Republic of Korea by omitting the entire explanation of the only legal government on the Korean peninsula while revising the existing government textbooks in 2018. At the time, when this expression was deleted and controversy arose, the writing supervisor Han Chun-hee, a professor at Pusan National University of Education, issued a position through the Ministry of Education and said, whether the scope of recognition of the only legitimate government mentioned in the resolution of the United Nations General Assembly in December 1948 should be to the south of the Korean peninsula. Except for the statement that the Republic of Korea is the only legitimate government on the Korean peninsula, the 1948 UN General Assembly resolution, which approved the Republic of Korea as the only legitimate government, was not the entire Korean peninsula, but south of the Sampal Line, where elections were held under the consultation and monitoring of the UN Temporary Committee. It was said that it was in accordance with the demands of the historical academic community that it was limited to the region. However, this is an interpretation made by misinterpreting the resolutions of the UN General Assembly, which some leftist historians have been claiming. It is pointed out that most of these certified textbooks did not properly include the clear fact that the Korean government is the only legal government on the Korean peninsula. 8 out of 11 species had photos or illustrations of the candlelight rally explaining the development of democracy in the 2000s. Some textbooks even made students explore, asking, why did people go out into the streets with candles? On the other hand, only 4 out of 11 textbooks used the expression miracle on the Han River, which symbolizes Korea's economic growth. At the time of the revision of textbooks in 2018, the Moon Jae-in government deleted the expression miracle on the Han River from the existing textbooks and included a picture of candlelight rally, and many of these textbooks showed a similar format. Most of the textbooks contained the contents of the Inter-Korean Summit during the Moon Jae-in administration, joint performances by Inter-Korean art troops, and the joint position of the South and North Korean athletes at the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics in the section titled The Future and Unification of the Korean Peninsula. However, there was only one textbook dealing with North Korean provocations, such as the shelling of Yunpyeong Island. Elementary schools across the country look at the 11 textbooks that have passed the examination and decide which textbook to use next year. Education experts said, because the 5th and 6th grades of elementary school are the first time to learn history, we need to teach them in a balanced way so that they can have the most common sense and pride in our country. He said he was concerned about it. The outline of the presidential office personnel and organizational reorganization work is expected to come out as early as this week. It is interpreted to mean that before the Chuseok holiday, the presidential office will finish the primary personnel reform and focus on the economy and people's livelihood. According to the presidential office, President Yoon Suk-yeol is expected to announce a small-scale reorganization plan as early as this week, while appointing a vacant first and second secretary for political affairs as early as this week. Jeon Hee-kyung, a former Saenuri Party lawmaker, is said to be the most likely to be the first secretary for political affairs in charge of the National Assembly-related affairs, and Jang Jae-in, Secretary General of the National Institute of Management, is reported to have been appointed as the second secretary for political affairs in charge of strategic planning. In addition, the Digital Communications Secretary's office, which caused a controversy by making a publicity image of President Yoon's photo who visited the flood-damaged site during the torrential rain in the metropolitan area last month, will be moved to the head of public relations. The move of the Digital Communications Secretary to the Senior Public Relations Department is read as a measure to strengthen public relations and to enhance political judgment on public relations. In addition to the replacement of the Secretary for Political Affairs and the reorganization of the Digital Communications Secretary, the personnel and organizational reorganization of the presidential office is in progress. First, it seems that the primary personnel and organizational restructuring work has entered the final stage, including the replacement of the Chief Public Relations Secretary, the establishment of the Chief Secretary for Policy Planning, the firing of the First and Second Secretary for Political Affairs, and the dismissal of 2 senior secretaries for civil society. However, given that 2 out of 3 secretaries in the Chief Political Office have changed and 2 secretaries in the Civil Society Office have been dismissed, the general consensus is that the possibility of replacing the Chief Political Affairs Secretary and the Chief Civil Society Secretary is low, as suggested by some. An official from the Presidential Office said, he said that the personnel and organizational restructuring inside the Presidential Office will be completed to some extent before the Chuseok holiday. Even if the primary personnel and organizational restructuring work is completed, it is expected that the personnel renewal of the presidential office below the secretary level will be carried out at all times. So far, about 10 secretaries and administrators have resigned or been dismissed, but there is a forecast that up to 80 to 100 people may change departments or be dismissed with this personnel renewal. Earlier, a high-ranking official at the presidential office said, the personnel renewal will continue in the future, he explained. With the personnel and organizational reorganization work, the central axis of power in the presidential office is expected to shift to those from bureaucrats and prosecutors. This is because the personnel renewal work in the presidential office was aimed at the so-called key officials of the so-called President Yoon Suk-yeol, such as Jang Jae-in, a member of the People's Power, and others. However, there are also voices of checks against those who have come from the prosecution. This is because it was pointed out that only those who came from the prosecution were excluded from the internal inspection. Domestic oil prices, which have been on a downward trend since the end of June, rebounded for the first time in 2 months. As international oil prices are highly variable, future price trends should be waited on, but there is also a forecast that they may rise again after autumn. According to Korea National Oil Corporation's Oil Price Information System, OPINET, the average selling price of gasoline and diesel at gas stations nationwide as of 4 p.m. on the 4th was 1,741.411 and 1,850.761 per liter, respectively. This is an increase of 4 to 12.1 compared to 1,737.771 and 1,838.581 on the 26th of last month, the lowest prices in the past 3 months. Gasoline and diesel prices sold at gas stations peaked at 2,144.91 and 2,167.661 per liter on June 30, when international oil prices continued to surge. Since then, the increase in the fuel tax cut rate, which has been in effect since July, and the decline in international oil prices have overlapped, and the graph has steadily declined. However, the price decline has slowed since the end of last month, and after the 26th, it rises and then falls slightly. In particular, diesel rose more than 12.1 in a week, a bigger increase than gasoline. In the 4th week of August, domestic refiners' supply prices also rose by 5.21 for gasoline and 28.31 for diesel from the previous week. Meanwhile, the price of gasoline by region was highest in Seoul at 1,812 and the lowest in Daegu at 1,686.81. The decline in domestic oil prices and the rebound is related to the recent fluctuations in international oil prices. The price of Dubai oil in the Middle East, which is the standard for domestic imported crude oil, fluctuates around $90 per barrel. The average price for the 4th week of August was $98.70, an increase from the 2nd week. The price of international petroleum products, such as gasoline and diesel, also rose last month and then fell again at the beginning of this month. The international crude oil and petroleum product market is unstable due to the movements of major oil-producing countries and the exchange rate represented by the strong dollar. In particular, it is analyzed that the price has been lowered due to the possibility of a global economic downturn, but has recently remained flat as demand for petroleum products has not decreased. Korea, which relies on imports, is inevitably sensitive to international price trends. Domestic sales prices are usually reflected after a time lag of about 2 weeks from international oil prices. Domestic gasoline and diesel prices will not jump sharply in the future, but there is a high possibility that they will not show a sharp decline as in July or August. Experts said, the international oil price, which has stopped falling, remains at the current level and has room to rise around November, when heating starts. Said he would. The $1 exchange rate eventually broke through the 1,361 range, reaching its highest level in 13 years and 5 months. This is due to the impact of the dollar's strength due to intense U.S. tightening, but there are concerns that the high exchange rate may lead to high inflation and high interest rates, leading to stagflation. According to the financial market on the 4th, the exchange rate of the won against the dollar ended at 1,262.61 in the Seoul foreign exchange market on the 2nd, up 7.71 from the previous day. 25.1 in 2 days and 31.31 higher than a week ago. Based on the weekly increase, it was the largest since September 21 to 25, 2015, 31.91. It is the first time since April 21, 2009, during the financial crisis, that the exchange rate rose to 1,361. The reason the exchange rate rises like this is that the US dollar is strengthening. As the US Federal Reserve expressed its willingness to tighten austerity, the value of the dollar rose, and currencies of other countries also fell. The problem is that the depreciation of the won is particularly large compared to other currencies such as the euro, yen, and yuan. The $1 exchange rate jumped 2.35% for 1 week from the 26th of last month to the 2nd of last month, when Fed Chairman Jerome Powell's remarks about the Jackson Hole meeting, which triggered the King Dollar, the dollar index, which shows the value of the dollar against the currencies of 6 major countries, showed the same. It rose only 0.7% over the period. The euro fell 0.13% against the dollar, the yen/dollar rose 1.89%, and the yuan/dollar rose 0.40%. The won depreciated 3.4 times more than the appreciation of the dollar, and in dollar terms, it fell 18 times more than the euro, 1.2 times more than the yen, and 5.9 times more than the yuan. In general, a decrease in the value of the won can help exports by strengthening the price competitiveness of export products in dollar terms. However, inflation is a problem in the current situation, as it raises the price of imports in won, which may make the economy worse. Looking at the consumer price inflation rate last month, it was 5.7% from the same month of the previous year, although the pace of increase was slower than the previous month, but it is still higher than the Bank of Korea's target of 2%. If inflation rises, the base interest rate must be raised, and the real economy may slow down as consumption and investment shrink due to the effect of the rate hike. This means that stagflation, in which an economic slowdown and inflation occur at the same time, is likely to occur. There are also speculations that the exchange rate will rise further in the future. The US Fed's interest rate hike is expected to continue for a while, and the slowdown in China's economy is also affecting the won's weakness. The widening trade deficit from this year to August is also cited as one of the reasons for accelerating the depreciation of the won. The trade deficit is in dollars more outgoing than in dollars, and the cumulative trade deficit from this year to August of this year was $24.723 billion, the largest ever. If the trade deficit deepens and the current account becomes dangerous, the exchange rate could rise again, entering a vicious cycle. Under this circumstance, an emergency macroeconomic and financial meeting will be held on the 5th, attended by Chu Kyung-ho, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Strategy and Finance, Lee Chong-yong, Governor of the Bank of Korea, Kim Joo-hyun, Chairman of the Financial Services Commission, Choi Sang-mok, Chief Economic Officer of the Presidential Office, and Lee Bok-hyun, Head of the Financial Supervisory Service. It is the first time in over a month since July 28 that they are gathering together. 6 out of 10 large companies have no plans to hire new employees in the second half of this year or have not yet made any plans. Analysts say that although labor demand is increasing as daily recovery expands, the job market is shrinking due to increasing corporate burdens such as high prices, high interest rates, and collapse of global supply chains. The Federation of Korean Industries commissioned a polling agency to survey new hiring plans for the top 500 companies in the second half of the year. As a result, 62% of the responding companies said that they had not established a new hiring plan or did not hire new employees. The number of companies that have not established new hires is 44.6% of the total, which is about 10 percentage points lower than the same period last year. The number of companies that would not hire them was 17.4%, down 4.1 percentage points from the previous year. The proportion of large companies that have established new hiring plans in the second half of this year stood at 38%, up 5.8 percentage points from the same period last year. Of these, 37% of companies said they would increase hiring compared to last year, 50% said they would be similar, and 13% said they would reduce their hiring. Reasons for not hiring new employees or increasing the size of recruitment were the lack of demand for additional manpower, difficulties in company circumstances such as restructuring and austerity management, prolonged coronavirus and worsening domestic and international economic and industrial economic conditions such as supply chain instability, and difficulties in securing human resources with the necessary job skills. It was found that this year's third high phenomenon, in which prices, interest rates, and exchange rates all rise, increased corporate management uncertainty and had a negative impact on recruitment plans in the second half of the year. 3 out of 10 large corporations said that there was a change in their recruitment in the second half of the year, such as suspending hiring or delaying the schedule due to the third high school phenomenon. Reconsideration of whether or not to hire was the most frequent, followed by reduction in the number of hiring, suspension of hiring, and postponement of hiring schedule. More than 6 out of 10 large companies said they would use regular hiring when hiring new employees. 19.8% of companies that only conduct ad hoc hiring, 42.2% of companies that plan to do both public and ad hoc hiring, and 38.0% of companies that only conduct public hiring. It was found that half of the companies that are hiring on a regular basis hire more than half of the total hiring plan through temporary hiring. In the college graduate recruitment market, the preference for science and engineering talent is expected to intensify. In the second half of this year, 7 out of 10 people planning to hire college graduates were science and engineering graduates. This is an increase of 6.9 percentage points from the first half of this year. As the number one policy task for expanding new college graduates, companies cited the expansion of corporate investment through deregulation the most. Next, support for companies in the new industry growth engine sector, improvement of the dual structure of the labor market, which is biased towards regular workers and labor unions, expansion of incentives for companies with increased employment, reinforcement of career guidance, and resolution of mismatches such as provision of employment information were followed. Ireland is the safest country in the world for women to travel alone. Korea was ranked 19th out of 34 countries. Bounce, a global luggage storage service and travel agency, recently released a ranking of the safest countries for women to travel alone in 2022. In this ranking evaluation, 7 indices surveyed by various organizations were reflected, such as the ratio of victims of violence and sexual assault, the ratio of women killed per 100,000 people, the safety index, the degree to which walking alone at night feels safe, and the rate of domestic violence. The safest country for female travelers was Ireland, with a score of 7.88 out of 10. It received high scores in all other criteria except for the safety index and the degree to which it is safe to travel alone at night. Austria, 7.7, and Norway, 7.45, took second and third places. Slovenia and Switzerland also took the top spot. Japan ranked 10th with a score of 5.79. Korea ranked 19th out of 34 countries with a score of 5.28. The safety index ranked 7th, and the ratio of female victims of homicide and sexual violence was 11th, which was relatively high. Colombia was ranked the least safe country for women to travel alone. Costa Rica, the United States, Chile, Turkey, Hungary, and Mexico were also rated at the bottom of the list with 3 out of 10. An elderly woman in her 70s has been crossing the threshold of a bank for decades carrying her father's cash receipt, which is estimated to be worth 10 billion won, but has not found the money and is appealing to government authorities for help. Kim Jae-Sik, 79, who lives in Yecheon-gun, Gyeongsang-buk-do, said that his father, Kim Joo-sik, had been trying to retrieve the cash receipt issued by Joong Bank in 1946 after depositing 12,220 yen in Japanese money, but he has not yet received it. Kim Joo-sik moved to Japan in 1910, when he was 14 years old, and left the money he had saved while working at the same time as liberation in 1945. On March 5, 1946, the head of the Pungcheon branch of Kohyung Bank, Jongsan Park, received the 12,220 yen Japanese money from Joo-sik Kim, who lives in Myeodong, Bomunmyeon, Yecheon-gun, on March 5, 1946 to prove the deposit. The value of the money Kim entrusted to him is estimated at 4 billion won to 7 billion won in the present value when roughly estimated in consideration of the exchange rate, inflation, and currency reform at the time. If you add up his 76 years of bank interest, it is estimated that it will exceed 10 billion won. However, after a considerable amount of time had passed, Kim visited Kohyung Bank again with a cash deposit certificate, but could not find the money he had left. It is said that the bank delayed the withdrawal the next day due to the loss of many data due to the outbreak of the Korean War and the inadequacy of the financial system. Afterwards, it is said that it was difficult to withdraw Japanese yen during the former President Park Chung-hee's era due to the accelerated economic development and the need for large amounts of foreign currency funds. When Jae-ho Kim visited Kohyung Bank with difficulty in the early 1980s, the government treasury officer looked at the data and said, "It is true that Woori Bank was in charge. That's a lot of money. More than 100 million won must be paid." But he is said to have said that he had to get a permit from the treasury to give him money. At that time, it was the former president of Chun-doo-won, and it was said that the government's permission was required to withdraw Kim's large sums. However, after 20 days of contacting the financial authorities, he received a reply saying, the authenticity of the cash receipt cannot be verified. Kim also sent a petition to the president, but to no avail. Now that Mr. Kim is old enough to look 80 years old, his youngest daughter is running around with a cash voucher for him. Kim's youngest daughter has recently filed a complaint with Shinyan Bank, which merged with the Financial Supervisory Service in Kohyung Bank, and is trying to find a way to get money. Although the current financial system has changed to be transparent and fair, she said, there is no way to verify that Kim's cash custody certificate is authentic, as most of the past data has been lost. While the 11th Typhoon Hinamno is heading north while maintaining a very strong force, mistakes are being made in various places by calling the name Hinamno and calling it Hanamno. Recently, many stories have been shared in online communities where Hinamno was incorrectly written as Hannamno. A large mart in Korea incorrectly wrote Hinamno as Hanamno on a poster indicating areas that could not be delivered due to the typhoon, but replaced it within 40 minutes. A TV news reporter on one general channel also made a mistake in pronouncing Hannamno while reporting on the typhoon, and in an expert interview connected by a news channel, the expert continued to repeat Hannamno in a row. In addition, if you search for Hannamno in the news item on the portal site, you can easily find articles from the media that sent out the typo as it is. Hinamno is expected to land at a point 20 km north-northwest of Busan at 9 am on the 6th after passing 180 km south-southwest of Sogwipo-si, Jeju at 9 pm on the 5th with a very river strength. 2. As there was concern about the huge damage caused by Hinamno, President Yoon Suk-yeol presided over a typhoon preparedness inspection meeting at the National Crisis Management Center in the presidential office that afternoon. Prime Minister Han Deok-soo, Minister of Public Administration and Security, Lee Sang-min, head of the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure Headquarters, and related ministries such as the Korea Meteorological Administration and the Korea Forest Service and local governments will report on the preparedness situation and request thorough responses focusing on vulnerable points. 2 people were sentenced to death, including a drug addict who traded drugs at a national psychiatric hospital in Hanoi, Vietnam, and even held hallucinatory parties. According to local media VN Express on the 2nd local time, the Hanoi People's Court sentenced 2 people to death on the 31st of last month, including inpatient Nguyen Chien Ki, who was handed over to trial on charges of drug dealing. 4 other accomplices, including hospital staff, were each sentenced to 7 years and 6 months in prison to life imprisonment. The Quay and his gang were charged with concealing and trading 15 kilograms of narcotics at the First National Mental Hospital. In particular, at the end of 2020, it was confirmed that Quay remodeled his hospital room, installed speakers and lights, and even held a drug party with other drug addicts. Local police found and confiscated about 5 kilograms of drugs in his room. In addition, it was found that he handed the doctor 10 million dong or about 570,000 won per month in return for acquiescing to the drug party, and also frequently provided drugs to 3 people, including hospital staff and nurses. A doctor who received money from Ki was sentenced to 3 years in prison for abuse of authority, and 3 hospital staff and a nurse were each sentenced to 5 to 7 years in prison. At the trial, the prosecution claimed, the defendant was diagnosed with a mental illness, but was fully aware of his actions at the time of the crime. Hospital staff member Nguyen An Buletin said, "I was afraid I could not report it to the authorities." Meanwhile, the authorities asked the head of the National Psychiatric Hospital to be held responsible for negligence and dismissed the post, and 3 other vice presidents were reprimanded. A YouTube channel run by the Korean government has been hacked 3 times in the past 6 days. No major damage other than temporary channel name change has been found so far, but simultaneous attacks have been made and systematic hacking is suspected. From mocking the government to a major hacking campaign, speculation is divided about the purpose of hacking. According to the Ministry of Culture, Sports, and Tourism on the 4th, the official YouTube channel of the Korean government was hijacked by hacking. At 3:20 am on the 3rd, the name of this channel was changed to SpaceX Invest, and a video related to virtual currency featuring Tesla founder Elon Musk was suddenly posted. The Ministry of Culture, Sports, and Tourism discovered the hack at around 6 am on the 3rd and restored the channel in the morning. This channel has about 262,000 subscribers. Prior to this, on the 1st, the Korea Tourism Organization's YouTube channel, Imagine Your Korea, was hacked. At the time of the first attack on the 1st, it was immediately identified and restored, but due to the second attack the next day, the channel was suspended until the afternoon of the 3rd, and then restored. This channel, where the Korean traditional music band ILG's video of BM Coming Down created a craze, has 509,000 subscribers. The YouTube channel of the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art, Korea was also restored in about 2 hours after a video related to virtual currency was uploaded due to a hack on the morning of the 29th of last month. An official from the Ministry of Culture, Sports, and Tourism said, the attack on 3 channels seems to be the same type of hacking. The reason why the government YouTube channel became the focus of the hacking was not disclosed. The government YouTube channel does not contain confidential information, but it seems to have hundreds of thousands of subscribers and is intended to maximize the topic of hacking while mocking the government authority and image. We cannot rule out the possibility of causing confusion among dissatisfied powers with respect to virtual currency or a prelude to a large-scale hacking attack. On the 3rd, the Ministry of Culture, Sports, and Tourism held a meeting to deal with hacking damage and discussed countermeasures. An official from the Ministry of Culture, Sports, and Tourism said, in case of hacking of government networks, the Cybersecurity Center can respond immediately, but since YouTube is a private company, we plan to strengthen monitoring and build a rapid response system. Thank you for watching today. Please subscribe and set an alarm.